Alright, on to question number 34. And it says, if a equals b plus 2, then b minus a to the power of 4 equals what? So it gives us a equals b plus 2, and it wants to know b minus a to the power of 4, this whole quantity to the power of 4, is equal to what? Okay, so you see we have two variables here that we also have in this equation. And if we manipulate this equation a little bit, we can get this equation to say b minus a. So for instance, if we subtract 2 from both sides, then we're left with a minus 2 equals b. And then if we subtract a from both sides, we're left with negative 2 equals b minus a. And you see that this quantity right here can be substituted right here. So, and this quantity right here is equal to negative 2. So in reality, this question is just, it simplifies down to negative 2 to the power of 4 is equal to what? And whenever we have a negative number to a positive exponent, the number will always be positive. So negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, well, that right here is 4 times 4, which is just equal to 16. And that's your answer. Alright, we'll go on to question number 35 here. Let's just reset the settings. Okay, 35 involves drawing. So I'll draw this really quickly. And I'll just skip ahead so it'll save some time. Okay, so question 35 says, a park has the shape and dimensions in blocks given below. A water fountain is located halfway between point B and point D. So halfway between point D and point B. Which of the following is the location of the water fountain from point A? And it says, note, the park's borders run east to west or north to south. Just meaning that these are all straight lines that have 90-degree angles. So they're not slanted or anything. Okay, so it wants to know how far is the water fountain, which is located halfway between point B and point D. How far is that from point A? So the strategy we're going to use to solve this is to find the midway point between points B and point D. So we basically have a line like this, the hypotenuse of this triangle, if you will, and we're trying to find the midpoint, which would be somewhere about right here. And then from there, we can find the distance to point A. But first, it's helpful to imagine this whole system on a coordinate plane. So if we imagine this being the y-axis, this line in green, this being the y-axis, and this bottom line being the x-axis, it'll help us label our points more and give a defined labeling of each point. Okay, so we want to know what point D is on this coordinate plane. We want to know right here, and we want to know what point B is, so we can just plug these into the midpoint formula eventually and solve for this point right here. But we need to know, it only says that length A to B is 10 meters, so this whole, or 10 units, so this whole length is 10 units. And we see that this length right here is 7 units from F to E. So we can see that D to C has to be 3 units, because these are all straight lines. This whole length is 10 units, this is 7, so this has to be 3. We can see that using the same rationale, we can see that A to F is 12 units, and E to D is only 3 units, so this right here has to be 9 units, and this goes all the way down. This is 9 units. So now we can label point D. Point D on this coordinate plane will be, point D will be, we'll have the coordinates 7, because it's 7 units over. So point D will be 7, comma 9, and point B will be at the coordinates 10, 0. So now we can just plug this into the midpoint formula, which is, the midpoint formula is this, midpoint formula is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And this will give us our xy coordinate of the midpoint between these 2 points. So we can just plug in x1, it doesn't matter which one we call x1. x1 we can say is 10, x2 will be 7 divided by 2, y1 can be 0, and y2 can be 9, and we can divide this by 2. And we see that 17 divided by 2 is equal to 8.5, and we can see that 9 divided by 2 is equal to 4.5. And this is the midpoint right here between, it's the midpoint between B and D is right here. But that's not what the question was asking. The question was asking, what's the distance from A? Well, we can see that this goes 8.5 units to the right, 8.5 units to the right, and 4.5 units up, because that's its y-coordinate and x-coordinate, xy coordinate. We see that that is equivalent to choice D, 8.5 blocks to the east and 4.5 blocks to the north. Alright, we'll go on to question 36. Let me just clear this. No. Alright, question 36. 36. Okay, it says, the larger of two numbers exceeds twice the smaller number by 8. The sum of twice the larger and 3 times the smaller number is 65. If x is the smaller number, which equation below determines the correct value of x? Okay, so this seems really wordy and difficult, but if you break it down, it's actually not that bad. So the question says, if x is the smaller number, so we have x is a smaller number, we can begin to deduce the formula it wants us to create. So it says the larger of the two numbers exceeds twice the smaller number by 8. So the bigger number is twice the smaller number. So it's 2 times the smaller number, but it says it exceeds it by 8. So whatever this number is, it is 8 more than the smaller number. And then it says the sum of twice the larger number and 3 times the smaller number is 65. So we have the sum of twice the larger number. So this is the larger number because the larger number is twice the smaller number plus 8. So the sum of twice the larger number, so 2 times this, plus 3 times the smaller number, which is just x from right here, 3 times the smaller number, is equal to 65. And we can see that that is equivalent to choice J. And that's the answer. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.